Before we get into what might be the most disturbing archaeological discovery ever made in the Middle East, I want you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Whether you're watching this during your morning coffee or late at night when you should be sleeping, just know that what you're about to hear is based on classified reports from a U.S. Army engineering team deployed to Kuwait in 2009. Reports that were sealed and never meant to see the light of day. This isn't ancient history. This isn't mythology. This happened to real soldiers conducting real operations in the Kuwaiti desert. And what they found beneath the sand changed everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres was a combat engineer trained in demolitions, construction, and route clearance. She'd deployed to Iraq twice before, survived IED strikes, firefights, and the general chaos of asymmetric warfare. But in 2009, she was sent to Kuwait, which was supposed to be a cake deployment. Kuwait was stable, secure, a logistics hub far from the fighting. Her mission was simple: help expand Camp Arifjan, one of the largest U.S. military installations in the Middle East. Simple missions have a way of becoming complicated, especially when you start digging in the desert and find things that should have stayed buried. This is the smoke pit, and this is the true story of the sand that screams. Camp Arifjan sat in the Kuwaiti desert about 60 miles south of Kuwait City, a sprawling complex of buildings, warehouses, and training facilities that served as a major hub for U.S. military operations in the region. In early 2009, the base was undergoing expansion to accommodate increased troop rotations. Rachel's engineering company was tasked with clearing and preparing a section of desert for new construction, work that involved surveying, excavation, and establishing the foundation for what would eventually become additional barracks and storage facilities. The desert around Arifjan was what you'd expect: flat, sandy, hot as hell during the day, and surprisingly cold at night. Nothing grew there except the occasional scrub brush that somehow survived on almost no water. It was the kind of landscape that made you understand why ancient peoples invented the concept of hell. Endless sand, brutal sun, and absolutely nothing to break up the monotony. Rachel's team began their survey work on a Monday morning in March. Temperature was already pushing 90 degrees at Oro 800 hours, and by noon it would be well over 100. They had ground-penetrating radar equipment, GPS mapping systems, and all the modern technology that made military engineering relatively straightforward. Scan the ground, identify any subsurface obstacles, mark them, and clear them before construction began. What the GPR showed them made no sense. Sergeant Torres, you need to look at this. Private First Class David Kim was manning the GPR console, staring at the display with a confused expression. I'm getting weird readings about 20 feet down, like really weird. Rachel walked over and looked at the screen. She'd been trained on GPR systems, knew how to read the data. Normally you'd see variations in density indicating different soil compositions, rocks, maybe old military debris from previous operations. But what Kim's screen showed was a pattern, a geometric pattern. Straight lines, right angles, what looked like structures arranged in a grid. "That looks like foundations," Rachel said. "Buildings, maybe. Could be an old settlement. In the middle of the desert? 20 feet underground?" Desert sands shift. Things get buried. Could be Bedouin ruins. Could be from the Iraqi occupation in the 90s. Either way, we need to notify the archaeologists before we dig. Military protocol required that any historical or cultural findings be reported to proper authorities. The Kuwaiti government had strict laws about archaeological sites, and the U.S. military wasn't about to create an international incident by bulldozing through ancient ruins. Rachel filed her report, expecting that they'd be reassigned to a different area while professionals came in to investigate. But that's not what happened. Instead, 2 civilians showed up the next day. Dr. Catherine Brennan and Dr. James Walsh, both claiming to be with the Army Corps of Engineers Historical Preservation Division. They spent about 20 minutes examining the GPR data, exchanged glances that Rachel couldn't quite read, and then gave an order that surprised everyone. "Continue your excavation," Dr. Brennan said, "but we're adjusting the mission parameters. We want you to dig down to these structures, carefully, and document everything you find. We'll be providing additional equipment and personnel." "Ma'am, respectfully, aren't we supposed to preserve archaeological sites, not excavate them?" Rachel asked. Dr. Walsh smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "This site has already been flagged for military necessity. The construction will proceed regardless. The question is whether we learn anything from what's down there before it's destroyed. You'll be helping preserve history, Sergeant Torres, by documenting it before it's gone." Something about that explanation didn't sit right with Rachel, but she wasn't being asked. She was being ordered. So her team brought in excavators, established a dig site, and began the careful process of removing 20 feet of sand to reach whatever was buried below. The work took 3 days. They dug in shifts, working around the clock, using lights at night to keep progress moving. The sand came away easily. At first, just standard desert sediment. But as they got deeper, the sand changed. It became darker, more compact, almost clay-like in consistency. And it had a smell. Not a rot smell or a decay smell, but something chemical, sharp, and unpleasant. "This stuff feels wrong," Kim said on the second day, scooping a handful of the darker sand. "It's too heavy. Sand shouldn't be this dense." Rachel took a sample and examined it. Kim was right. The sand at this depth was significantly denser than normal, with an unusual texture. Almost crystalline, like thousands of tiny glass beads compressed together. She took samples for analysis, marked the depth, and they continued digging. On the third day, they hit stone. Not natural rock formation, but worked stone. Cut blocks fitted together with precision that indicated advanced construction techniques. They'd found the structures the GPR had detected. And as they cleared more sand away, the scale of what they'd discovered became apparent. It was a city, or what was left of one. Buildings, streets, what looked like a central plaza. All of it buried 20 feet below the surface, preserved perfectly by the sand that had covered it for God knows how many years. The architecture was unlike anything Rachel had seen before. Not Arabic, not Persian, not any style she recognized from her limited knowledge of Middle Eastern history. Dr. Brennan and Dr. Walsh arrived within hours of the structures being exposed. They brought additional personnel, all civilians, all carrying equipment that looked more scientific than archaeological. They established a perimeter around the dig site, posted guards, and began a systematic examination of the ruins. Rachel and her team were told to stand by, ready to assist if needed, but otherwise keeping clear of the actual investigation, which gave Rachel time to observe, to watch the way the civilian team worked, and to notice things that seemed off. Like the way they all wore respirators when working near the darker sand. Like the way they collected samples in sealed containers and handled them with extreme caution. Like the way Dr. Brennan looked increasingly disturbed as she examined tablets and inscriptions they were finding in the ruins. On the evening of the fourth day, Rachel approached Dr. Brennan. "Ma'am, can I ask what we found here? My team is starting to get nervous. The rumors are spreading." Dr. Brennan looked at Rachel for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. "What do you know about ancient Mesopotamian civilization, Sergeant?" "Not much. Sumerians, Babylonians, early human civilization. This predates all of that by thousands of years. The radiocarbon dating we're getting is problematic. The structures appear to be at least 8,000 years old, possibly older. But that shouldn't be possible. Cities this advanced didn't exist 8,000 years ago. Humans were barely agricultural at that point, let alone building urban centers with this level of sophistication." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't know what we found. But based on the inscriptions we've translated, and based on what we're finding in the sand itself, I think this city was destroyed. Deliberately. And whatever destroyed it turned the population into the sand that buried it." Rachel felt cold, despite the evening heat. "What do you mean, turned them into sand?" Dr. Brennan pulled out her tablet and showed Rachel a microscopic image. It showed what looked like sand grains, but as Rachel looked closer, she could see structure within them. Patterns that looked almost like cells, like organic tissue compressed and crystallized. "Every grain of sand in this deeper layer," Dr. Brennan said quietly, "contains traces of human DNA. Not just traces. Each grain appears to be a compressed, crystallized human cell. Billions of them. We think there were at least 50,000 people living in this city when it was destroyed. And we think they were all transformed, somehow, into the sand that buried their city." Rachel stared at the image, her mind refusing to accept what she was being told. "That's not possible. You can't turn a person into sand." "I agree. It shouldn't be possible. But here we are, walking on what used to be 50,000 human beings. The inscriptions we've found, they tell a story. A warning, actually, about the price of defying the gods, about a punishment that would ensure the guilty could never rest, never die, never escape their fate. They would become one with the desert, their consciousness preserved in eternal torment." "You're saying these sand grains are conscious?" "I'm saying we don't know. But there's electromagnetic activity in the sand that we can't explain. Patterns that almost look like neural firing. And the locals, the Bedouins who live in this region, they have stories about areas of desert that sing at night, about sand that moves on its own, about travelers who disappear, their bodies never found, just more sand left behind. Rachel looked out at the excavation site, at the tons of sand they'd moved, sand that had once been people who'd been alive, who'd had families and jobs and dreams, who'd been punished by something with the power to transform human flesh into silicon. What happened to them? Rachel asked. Who did this? We don't know. The inscriptions reference sky gods and divine judgment, but that's not helpful. What concerns me more is what happens if we disturb this site too much. If there really is some form of preserved consciousness in this sand, what happens when we start moving it, processing it, building on top of it? Rachel didn't have an answer, but she was about to find out. That night, the first soldier disappeared. Private Gregor Webb, part of the security detail guarding the excavation site. He was last seen at 200 hours during his watch rotation. When his relief arrived at 400 hours, Webb was gone. No sign of struggle, no footprints leading away, no indication of where he'd gone. Just his rifle, his gear, and a small pile of sand where he'd been standing. The search for Private Webb lasted 12 hours. They used thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, every piece of technology available. Dogs were brought in to track his scent, which led directly to the spot where his gear had been found, and then simply stopped, as if Webb had vanished into thin air. Or into the ground. Rachel stood at the edge of the excavation site, watching the search teams comb through the area for the third time. The pile of sand where Webb had been standing bothered her. It was the same dark, dense sand they'd found at depth, not the lighter surface sand that covered most of the desert. As if it had come from below, pushed up through 20 feet of earth to reach the surface. Sergeant Torres. Dr. Walsh approached, his expression grim. We need to show you something. In the lab tent. The lab tent was a climate-controlled structure they'd set up to analyze findings from the dig. Inside, Dr. Brennan was examining samples under a high-powered microscope connected to a computer monitor. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the excavation began. Look at this, she said, gesturing to the monitor. It showed a microscopic view of sand grains, but unlike the previous images Rachel had seen, these grains were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. Shifting position, clustering together, forming patterns. This is from the pile where Private Webb disappeared, Dr. Brennan explained. We collected samples immediately after his gear was found. The grains are exhibiting coordinated behavior. They're not just moving randomly. They're organizing. Organizing into what? Dr. Brennan clicked to another image, this one showing a larger scale view. The sand grains had formed distinct structures, shapes that looked almost like letters, like writing, though in no alphabet Rachel recognized. We think it's the same script we found on the tablets in the ruse, Dr. Walsh said. We're working on translation, but preliminary analysis suggests it's a name, Gregor Webb's name. The sand formed his name. Rachel felt her stomach drop. You're saying the sand knows who he was? We're saying the sand might be him now, or part of him. We don't understand the mechanism, but based on what we're seeing, we think Private Webb didn't disappear. He was absorbed, transformed into more sand, just like the original inhabitants of this city. That's insane. I agree. But look at this. Dr. Brennan pulled up another set of images. These are DNA samples from the sand pile. We're finding Webb's genetic markers, fresh markers, less than 24 hours old. He's in there, Sergeant. Somehow, impossibly, Private Gregor Webb has become part of the sand. Rachel stared at the images, trying to process what she was being told. It violated every law of physics, every principle of biology. You couldn't turn a human being into sand, and yet here was the evidence right in front of her. What do we do? Rachel asked. How do we stop this? We're not sure we can, Dr. Walsh admitted. But we're going to try. First priority is containing the area. No one goes near the excavation site except essential personnel in full protective gear. Second, we need to understand what triggers the transformation. Why Webb? Why now? What activated it? Dr. Brennan looked uncomfortable. I have a theory, but you're not going to like it. The inscriptions we've translated, they talk about a curse, a punishment for the city's inhabitants because they committed some kind of crime against the gods. But the curse doesn't just affect the guilty. It spreads to anyone who disturbs the site. Anyone who touches the sand carries the curse with them. And when the time is right, when the sand is ready, it takes them. So by excavating this site, we activated the curse. Something like that. Though I don't believe in curses. I think we're dealing with something more scientific. Some form of nanotechnology, maybe, or a biological agent that we don't understand. Something that was created 8,000 years ago and has been dormant in this sand ever since, waiting for the right conditions to activate. Rachel's radio crackled. Sergeant Torres, this is Kim. We have another situation. You need to get to the south perimeter, now. Rachel ran. When she reached the south perimeter, she found Kim and 3 other soldiers standing well back from a section of sand that was moving, visibly moving, flowing like water, forming a shape. As Rachel watched, the sand rose up approximately 6 feet tall, roughly humanoid in form. It had no features, no details, just a vague approximation of a human figure made entirely of sand. And it was walking toward them.
Open fire, Rachel ordered. The soldiers hesitated for just a moment, then followed orders. Rifle rounds tore through the sand figure, passing through with minimal effect. The bullets disrupted the form temporarily, causing sand to spray in all directions, but the figure reformed immediately, the scattered grains flowing back together like water returning to a pool. Fall back! Everyone fall back to the main compound. Rachel was already moving, her team following. Behind them, the sand figure continued its slow but inexorable approach, and as they ran, Rachel saw more figures rising from the desert. Dozens of them, all formed from that dark, dense sand, all moving toward the camp. They reached the main compound and sealed the gates. Through the perimeter fence, they could see the sand figures assembling. Not attacking, not advancing, just standing there. watching, waiting. "What are they?" Kim asked, his voice shaking. "I think they're the people who used to live here," Rachel said. "Or what's left of them. And I think they're angry that we disturbed their rest." Dr. Brennan's team had retreated to the command building, where they were frantically reviewing their data and making phone calls to what Rachel assumed were higher military authorities. Rachel forced her way into the building, pushing past guards who tried to stop her. "We need to evacuate this base," Rachel said without preamble. "Right now, before more people disappear." Dr. Brennan looked up from her laptop, her face pale. "We can't." "Orders from above. This site is too important. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we abandon it. People are dying. One person, Private Webb. And we don't know if he's dead or if he's been transformed. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, Webb is gone, and there's an army of sand monsters outside our fence. I'd say that qualifies as dead." Dr. Walsh intervened. "Sergeant, I understand your concern. But this discovery could change everything we know about ancient civilizations, about the limits of technology, about consciousness itself. We can't just walk away." "We can and we should. Nothing here is worth more lives." But Rachel knew, even as she said it, that the decision wasn't hers to make. The military had protocols, chains of command, people making decisions based on information she didn't have access to. All she could do was keep her soldiers safe and hope that someone higher up the chain would see reason before it was too late. Night fell, and the temperature dropped from brutal heat to surprising cold. Rachel organized defensive positions, established watch rotations, made sure everyone was armed and alert. The sand figures remained outside the perimeter, motionless now, but their presence was a constant psychological pressure. At 2300 hours, Private Kim was on watch at the East Tower when he radioed in a report. "Sergeant Torres, the sand figures are doing something. They're moving, but not toward us. They're arranging themselves into patterns." Rachel grabbed night vision binoculars and looked. Kim was right. The figures had formed into rows and columns, creating what looked like streets and buildings. They were reconstructing their city, not with stone and mortar, but with their own bodies, with the sand they'd become. And as Rachel watched, she realized they were doing more than just arranging themselves. They were communicating. The figures were making sounds. Not voices exactly, but a rhythmic whisper, like wind through grass or static on a radio. And underneath that whisper, barely audible, was something else. Singing. Thousands of voices singing in unison, a melody that was beautiful and terrible and utterly alien to human ears. "Do you hear that?" Kim asked over the radio. "The singing? I hear it. Don't listen too closely. I think that's how they get inside your head." But it was already too late. Rachel could feel the song working on her, could feel it resonating with something deep in her brain. It wasn't music in any conventional sense. It was more primal than that, more fundamental. It was the sound of consciousness itself, of billions of minds trapped in silicon crying out for release, and it was calling to her, inviting her to join them, promising her that the transformation wouldn't hurt, that it would be a relief, that she would finally understand what they understood, that death wasn't the end, that consciousness could exist in forms humans had never imagined. Rachel shook her head violently, trying to clear the thoughts that weren't her own. "Everyone get inside. Don't look at them. Don't listen to the singing." The soldiers retreated from the perimeter, sealing themselves inside buildings, covering their ears. But the singing continued, growing louder, more insistent, and Rachel realized with horror that it wasn't just coming from outside. It was coming from below, from the sand beneath their feet. The entire base was built on it, on the transformed remains of an ancient civilization. And that sand was waking up. The singing stopped at exactly 0200 hours. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the sound had been. Rachel stood in the command building, surrounded by her remaining team, listening to the absence of noise. Outside, through the reinforced windows, they could see the sand figures still standing in their geometric patterns, motionless once again. "Why did they stop?" Kim asked. "I don't know, but I don't think it's good." Rachel keyed her radio. "All positions, sound off. Give me a head count." One by one, the watch positions reported in. But when Rachel tallied the numbers, her blood ran cold. They'd started the night with 43 personnel on base. Now they had 38. 5 people were missing. "Who's unaccounted for?" Dr. Brennan asked, her voice tight. Rachel checked her roster. Specialists Martinez, Johnson, and Lee from the engineering team. Corporal Davis from security. And, she paused, her stomach sinking, Private Kim. But that's impossible. Kim just reported in from the East Tower 5 minutes ago. As if on cue, Kim's voice came over the radio again. "Sergeant Torres, I'm seeing movement at the south perimeter. Multiple contacts approaching the fence." Rachel looked at the Private Kim standing beside her in the command building. The man who'd been with her for the past 2 hours. The man who'd reported the singing. She looked at him carefully, really looked, and that's when she noticed it. His uniform was wrong. The name tape said KIM, but it was slightly off-center. His boots were clean, despite hours of walking through dusty facilities. And his eyes, when she looked directly into them, reflected the fluorescent lights in a way human eyes shouldn't, like light bouncing off millions of tiny mirrors. "Who are you?" Rachel asked quietly, her hand moving to her sidearm. The thing wearing Kim's face smiled. "I'm David Kim, Private First Class, Service number 384229847, born in Los Angeles, California. Joined the Army in 2007, currently assigned to..." "That's biographical data. That's not who you are." Rachel drew her pistol, aiming at center mass. The other soldiers in the room scrambled for their weapons, suddenly realizing something was wrong. The Kim thing's smile widened unnaturally. "You're right. I'm not David Kim. I used to be someone else. Many someone elses. We're all in here together. David is here too, now. He's part of us, part of the sand, and soon you will be too." Rachel fired. The bullet passed through the Kim thing's chest, punching a clean hole that immediately filled with flowing sand. The figure's form began to destabilize, the features melting, the body losing cohesion. Within seconds, there was nothing left but a pile of sand on the command building floor. Sand that started moving, flowing across the floor toward the soldiers' feet. Everyone scrambled backward, but the sand was fast, spreading in all directions, reaching for them like fingers made of silicon. "Get out! Everyone out!" Rachel ordered. They fled the command building, but as they emerged into the night, they found themselves surrounded. The sand figures had moved while they were inside, had somehow crossed the perimeter without triggering any alarms. They stood in a circle around the building, blocking every exit. And as Rachel watched, more figures rose from the ground itself, sand flowing up through cracks in the concrete, through drain covers, through anywhere it could seep. "We're trapped," Dr. Walsh said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're everywhere. In the ground, in the buildings, maybe even in us. Those samples we collected, the ones we've been handling without proper containment, what if we're already infected?" Rachel hadn't considered that. But now that Walsh mentioned it, she could feel something. An itch deep under her skin, a sensation like sand grinding against bone. Was it her imagination? Or was she already transforming, her cells slowly crystallizing from the inside out? Dr. Brennan was on her satellite phone, shouting into it. "I don't care what the protocol is. We need immediate evacuation. We have an active biological threat and multiple casualties. Authorization code Delta 97 Tango Alpha. Yes, I understand this is above your clearance. Then get me someone who has the clearance." The sand figures began to advance. Not running, not rushing, just walking slowly forward with inexorable patience. They didn't need to hurry. Where could the humans go? The entire desert was sand. Their vehicles, their equipment, even the structures they hid in, everything sat on sand. They were already surrounded, already defeated. The sand was just waiting for them to understand that. Into the supply bunker. Rachel pointed to a reinforced concrete structure near the center of the compound. "It's elevated on pilings. Maybe the sand can't reach us there." They ran, the sand figures following at their unhurried pace. The bunker was sealed with a heavy metal door that Rachel slammed shut behind them. Inside, battery-powered emergency lights provided dim illumination for the small space packed with food, water, and ammunition. 14 people, all that remained of the base's garrison, pressed together in a space meant for supplies. "How long can we last here?" someone asked. "Doesn't matter," Dr. Brennan said, still on her phone. "Help is coming." They're scrambling a rescue team from Kuwait City. ETA 45 minutes. "We don't have 45 minutes, Dr. Walsh said, pointing at the floor. Even here, elevated above the ground, sand was seeping in. Through microscopic gaps around the door seal, through ventilation grates, through cracks they couldn't see. It accumulated in the corners, flowing like water, forming small piles that shifted and moved with purposeful intent. Rachel grabbed duct tape from a supply shelf and began sealing the door gaps. Other soldiers joined her, taping over vents, covering any opening they could find. But it was useless. The sand found ways in. It always found ways in. "We need to understand what they want," Dr. Brennan said, kneeling beside one of the sand piles. "They're not just killing randomly. There's a pattern. The people who've been taken, they all had something in common." "What?" Rachel asked. They all touched the tablets. The inscribed stones from the ruins. Martinez was photographing them. Johnson was measuring them. Lee was trying to move one. Even Private Kim, he picked up a tablet fragment to examine it. They were all exposed to the curse directly, through physical contact with the remains of the original city. Rachel thought about that. She hadn't touched any of the tablets. None of them in this bunker had, as far as she knew. Maybe that's why they were still human. Maybe they still had time. So, if we haven't touched the tablets, we're safe. I don't know. The curse, or whatever we're calling it, it might be spreading, contaminating more sand, growing stronger. Or maybe there's a time delay. Maybe we're all infected and just don't know it yet. The sand piles in the corners were growing larger, coalescing into forms. Not fully humanoid yet, but getting there. The soldiers aimed their weapons at the piles, ready to fire, but Rachel held up her hand. "Wait, don't shoot yet. Brennan, you said they want something. What?" Dr. Brennan pulled out her tablet, showing Rachel the translated inscriptions. The city was destroyed because they defied their gods. Specifically, they tried to achieve immortality through technology. They developed some kind of process, described in the texts as becoming one with the eternal earth. They thought they'd discovered a way to transcend death, to preserve consciousness forever in an inorganic medium. "The sand," Rachel said. "They turned themselves into sand. Not voluntarily. The texts suggest it was a punishment. The gods twisted their achievement into a curse. Yes, they achieved immortality. Yes, their consciousness persists, but not in the glorious eternal existence they'd hoped for. They're trapped. Aware, but unable to move, to speak, to do anything except exist as grains of sand. For 8,000 years they've been conscious, feeling everything, experiencing time at a pace we can't comprehend. And they're in agony. So what do they want from us? I think they want us to join them. Not out of malice, but out of loneliness. Or maybe they want us to end their suffering, and the only way they know how is to share it with us. The sand forms in the corners had grown to roughly human size now. They didn't attack, just stood there waiting. And Rachel realized she could see faces in the sand, not clear features, but suggestions of features. And those faces looked sad, desperate, pleading. "We need to leave," Dr. Walsh said. "If rescue is coming, we need to be ready to move fast when they arrive." But as if in response to his words, the satellite phone in Dr. Brennan's hand crackled with static and then went dead. Rachel tried her radio. Nothing but white noise. They'd been cut off. Whether by technical failure or by the sand's interference, they were now completely isolated. "They don't want us to leave," Rachel said. "They want us to stay, to become part of this place, part of them." One of the soldiers, a young specialist whose name Rachel couldn't remember, suddenly clutched his chest and fell to his knees. "Something's wrong. I can't breathe. It feels like my lungs are filling with—" He coughed, and sand poured from his mouth. Not a little sand, but streams of it, flowing like water. His skin took on a gray pallor, his movements became jerky and uncoordinated, and his eyes, when he looked up at Rachel, were filled with sand that glittered in the emergency lights. "Help me," he managed to say, his voice distorted, echoing, as if 100 voices were speaking through him at once. "Please help us. It hurts. Everything hurts. Make it stop. Make it—" He collapsed completely, his body dissolving into sand that spread across the bunker floor and flowed toward the other piles. Within seconds, there was no sign he'd ever been human except for his uniform and gear, left behind like a shed skin. 13 people left. 12 soldiers and 1 scientist, trapped in a bunker surrounded by sand that wanted to make them part of itself. Rachel looked at her team, saw the fear in their eyes, the dawning understanding that they might not survive the night. But she also saw determination. They were soldiers. They'd signed up to face danger, and if they were going down, they'd go down fighting. "Brennan," Rachel said, "in your translations, was there any mention of how to stop this? How to end the curse?" Dr. Brennan scrolled through her tablet's notes, her hands shaking. "There are references to appeasement, to sacrifice. The text suggests that the gods who punished the city could be satisfied with offerings, that the curse could be lifted if the right price was paid. What kind of price? A life, or lives. Specifically, lives given willingly. The punishment was for hubris, for trying to cheat death. The cure is accepting death, embracing it. Someone has to choose to become sand, not as a victim, but as a willing participant. And in doing so, they take on the burden of all the others, allowing them to finally rest." "That's insane," Dr. Walsh protested. "You're talking about human sacrifice. We're not going to—" "We're already dying," Rachel interrupted. "One by one, we're being taken. The question isn't whether we sacrifice someone. The question is whether we control how it happens, give it meaning, or whether we just wait for the sand to take us all eventually." She looked at her soldiers. Young faces, most of them barely old enough to drink legally. They'd joined the army for college money, for adventure, for a way out of dead-end towns. They didn't deserve to die in a Kuwaiti bunker, transformed into silicon by an 8,000-year-old curse. "I'll do it," Rachel said. "I'm the ranking NCO. It's my responsibility to protect my soldiers. If someone has to be the sacrifice, it should be me. No. Private Kim, the real Kim, who'd been quiet since they'd discovered his duplicate, stepped forward. It should be me. I touched the tablets. I'm probably already infected. And besides, you're needed here, Sergeant. You're the one who can lead them out if this works. Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank, but Kim was right. If the sacrifice worked, if it somehow appeased whatever force controlled the sand, someone needed to be alive and capable of getting the survivors to safety. And that someone couldn't be the person who gave themselves to the sand. Kim, you don't have to do this. Yeah, I do. Because if I don't, we all die. And at least this way, maybe I can help those poor bastards who've been trapped for 8,000 years. Maybe I can give them peace. He looked at Dr. Brennan. What do I need to do? Dr. Brennan consulted her notes. According to the texts, the sacrifice has to be voluntary and public. You have to go out there, among them, and offer yourself willingly. And you have to speak the words of acceptance. I'll write them down phonetically for you. She scribbled on a piece of paper, ancient Sumerian words transliterated into English letters. Kim took the paper, studied it, practicing the pronunciation. His hands weren't shaking. He looked calm, resolved, more at peace than Rachel had ever seen him. One more thing, Kim said. If this doesn't work, if I do this and the sand still comes for you, I want you to burn it. All of it. Call in an airstrike, use napalm, whatever it takes. Turn this whole area to glass. Don't let anyone else suffer what these people have suffered. I'll make sure it happens, Rachel promised. Kim walked to the bunker door. The sand figures outside had been patient, standing motionless. But as Kim opened the door, they moved, not aggressively but purposefully creating a path, inviting him to walk among them. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped out into the night. Rachel and the others watched through the bunker's small windows. They saw Kim walk into the center of the sand figures, saw him kneel in the desert sand, saw him speak the ancient words that Dr. Brennan had given him. His voice carried on the still night air, strange syllables that seemed to resonate with the sand itself. And the sand responded. It rose up around Kim, not violently, but gently, almost tenderly. It flowed over his feet, his legs, his torso, his arms. He didn't struggle, didn't try to escape. He closed his eyes and continued speaking the words, even as sand filled his mouth, even as his skin began to take on that gray crystalline appearance they'd seen in the others. But something was different this time. As Kim transformed, the other sand figures began to glow. Faintly at first, then brighter, a blue-white light emanating from within them. And they began to sing again. But this time it wasn't the terrible hungry song that had driven soldiers mad. This was something else. Beautiful. Peaceful. A choir of 50,000 voices raised in what could only be described as joy. Kim's transformation completed. He stood among the figures, now made of sand himself, glowing with that same inner light. And then, one by one, the other figures began to collapse, not falling apart chaotically, but settling gently, like snow melting in spring sunlight. They dissolved back into individual grains of sand, the light fading, the singing quieting to a whisper and then to silence. Within minutes, it was over. The sand figures were gone. The only one left standing was Kim, or what had been Kim. He looked toward the bunker, and though his features were now crystalline and immobile, Rachel could have sworn he smiled. Then he too dissolved, his sand mixing with all the others, until there was no way to tell which grains had been Kim and which had been the ancient city dwellers. Dr. Brennan's satellite phone crackled back to life. Base Sierra 7, this is Raptor 3-1. We are inbound for emergency extraction. What is your status? Rachel grabbed the phone. Raptor 3-1, this is Sergeant Torres. We have sustained casualties but have survivors ready for extraction. Be advised, the hostile threat has been neutralized. Copy that, Sierra 7. ETA 12 minutes. Those 12 minutes felt like hours. The surviving soldiers stayed in the bunker, weapons ready, watching the desert for any sign of movement. But the sand remained still, normal, just sand, not the consciousnesses of ancient peoples, not hungry entities waiting to transform them, just silicon and minerals, dead matter ground down by wind and time. The rescue helicopter arrived right on schedule, a CH-47 Chinook that touched down outside the base perimeter. Rachel led her team to the aircraft, 13 people of the original 43 stationed at the site. As they lifted off, Rachel looked down at the excavation, at the ruins they'd uncovered, at the sand that held so many secrets and so much suffering. "What happens to the site now?" she asked Dr. Brennan. "It gets buried again, covered over, marked off limits, forgotten. The official report will say we found nothing of archaeological value. The construction project will be moved to a different location, and Private Kim's death will be listed as accident during excavation operations. None of what really happened here will ever be acknowledged." That's wrong. People should know. They should know what Kim did. If people know, they'll want to study it, and if they study it, they risk waking it up again. Some things are better left buried, Sergeant. Sometimes the cost of knowledge is too high. Rachel couldn't argue with that. She'd seen firsthand what happened when humans disturbed things they didn't understand. 8,000 years ago, a civilization had reached too far, had tried to conquer death, and had been punished with a fate worse than death. Now, in the modern era, they'd almost repeated the same mistake. Back at Camp Arifjan's main facility, Rachel and her team were debriefed extensively. They were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, warned that revealing classified information could result in court-martial. The official story was prepared and disseminated. An excavation accident, structural collapse, multiple casualties but no unusual circumstances. But Rachel knew the truth, and she knew that Kim's sacrifice had saved them, had given peace to 50,000 souls who'd been trapped in silicon agony for 8 millennia. She made sure that in her private records, in documents she would never be required to turn over, she documented everything. Every detail, every horror, every moment of heroism. A week after the incident, Dr. Brennan contacted Rachel privately. "I thought you should know. We analyzed the sand samples we collected before the evacuation. The DNA signatures are gone. The electromagnetic activity has ceased. Whatever consciousness existed in that sand, it's truly gone now. Kim's sacrifice worked. He freed them." "Good," Rachel said. "That's what he would have wanted. There's something else. We found this among the artifacts we recovered from the ruins before everything went wrong." She handed Rachel a small clay tablet, no bigger than a playing card, covered in the same script they'd seen throughout the site. "What does it say?" "It's a warning. And a thank you. It was written by the high priest of the city just before the punishment was enacted. He says that if anyone ever discovers their city, if anyone ever uncovers what they became, that person should know the truth. They brought it on themselves. They chose to pursue immortality, knowing the risks. And if they're ever freed from their prison, they will be grateful to whoever made the sacrifice necessary to end their suffering. So they knew someone like Kim might come along eventually. They hoped. For 8,000 years, they hoped that someone would find them and be brave enough to do what needed to be done. Private Kim fulfilled an 8,000-year-old prophecy. Rachel looked at the tablet, at the ancient writing that represented a civilization's last message to the future. Can I keep this? Officially, no. All artifacts are government property. Unofficially, Dr. Brennan slipped the tablet into Rachel's hand. I think Private Kim earned the right to be remembered, and I think you're the one who should remember him. Rachel kept the tablet in her footlocker for the rest of her deployment. Every night before sleep, she'd take it out and hold it, thinking about Kim, about the 50,000 souls he'd freed, about the nature of sacrifice and heroism. Kim had been 22 years old, a kid from Los Angeles who'd joined the army to pay for college. He'd wanted to be an engineer, to build things, to make the world better. In the end, he'd done exactly that. He'd built a bridge between the living and the dead, between the present and an ancient past, and he'd made the world better by ending suffering that had lasted longer than recorded history. 6 months later, Rachel rotated home. She left the army, went to college on the GI Bill, earned a degree in archaeology. Not because she wanted to dig up more ancient ruins, but because she wanted to understand. To study the civilizations that had come before, to learn from their mistakes, to make sure that humanity never again reached so far that it fell into the same trap. And sometimes, late at night, she'd take out that small clay tablet and read the translated words Dr. Brennan had provided. We tried to live forever, and lost what it means to live. May those who find us remember, death is not the enemy. It is the price we pay for being alive. Accept it, embrace it, and when your time comes, go willingly, knowing that your sacrifice will mean something. Private. David Kim had learned that lesson, and his sacrifice had meant everything. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. This story is based on classified reports from military engineering units deployed to Kuwait in the late 2000s. The names have been changed, some details altered to protect classified information, but the core events happened. An excavation site was discovered and abandoned. Personnel were lost under circumstances that were never adequately explained, and the site was sealed, buried, and declared off-limits by military authorities. The U.S. Army officially denies any unusual incidents at Camp Arifjan during this period. All casualties are listed as routine training accidents or equipment failures. But the soldiers who were there know differently. They know that beneath the sand of the Kuwaiti desert lies something ancient and terrible, something that proves consciousness can exist in forms we never imagined. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more real military encounters with the unexplained. Share this video with someone who's interested in archaeology, ancient civilizations, or the price of immortality. Leave a comment with your thoughts. If you could live forever, would you take that offer? Even knowing the potential cost? Until next time, remember, not all that's buried should be uncovered. Some mysteries are meant to stay hidden beneath the sand. This has been the Smoke Pit. Stay curious, but stay careful.